several people have told me that the woman accused of killing her children and then herself was a great mom.
Andrea Davis shot a woman in the back of the head outside a sports bar in Glendale, Arizona. Then she got in her car and she drove home. 20 minutes later, while police were standing right next to her husband taking his statement in that same parking lot, his phone lit up. It was Andrea. The officers watched his face change as he read it. They leaned in. They started reading over his shoulder. And then one more message came through. A photograph of one of their children bleeding from the head. Her name was Andrea Clarice Davis, 38 years old, 12-year marriage, 2 kids, no criminal record, no prior police contact, not even once. Her 10-year-old son, Austin, was described by everyone who knew him as a spunky, wild spirit who loved his dad deeply. His little brother, Nolan, was 18 months old. By 2:25 that same morning, Phoenix police forced entry into the family home. What they found inside is something none of them will ever forget. And what led Andrea Davis, a mother with no history of violence, no record, no warning flags in the system, to that house, that night, with that gun, is the story we're about to tell. Before we talk about what happened, we have to talk about who Andrea Davis was on any other day. By every account, Andrea was not a violent person. She was a wife, a mother, a woman who, according to her best friend Amy Bowers, was completely falling apart in the weeks leading up to May 25th, but who had never, not once, been the subject of a police call. Neither Glendale PD nor Phoenix PD had any prior record of contact with this family. No domestic violence calls, no welfare checks, no history of threats. So when detectives began building a picture of Andrea Davis, they weren't working backwards from a criminal record. They were working backwards from a marriage that was quietly, privately disintegrating. Andrea and Nolan had been married for 12 years. 2 children, 1 home near Paradise Lane in Phoenix. By the spring of 2026, something had shifted. Friends say Andrea had become consumed by the belief that Nolan was having an affair with a coworker. Her best friend Amy Bowers didn't mince words. She said it completely made her lose her mind. Whether or not the affair was real doesn't matter for the purposes of what happened next. What matters is that Andrea believed it, completely, totally, with everything she had. And when Nolan reportedly began discussing separation, Andrea's world didn't just crack, it collapsed. She began asking friends a question that, in hindsight, was loaded with something darker than confusion. She kept asking, "What am I supposed to do with the kids?" At the time, those around her heard it as anxiety, a mother afraid of an unknown future, worried about custody, worried about being alone.
May you dance on the clouds and fly in the sky. It is not fair. I can't even imagine what my cousin's going through right now, but please just pray for the Queens and the Davises, okay? Like I said, you never know what's going on behind closed doors, and these kids did not deserve to die. They're too little. They don't even have a life yet.
It is a difficult question to even think of a possible answer of what could justify something like this. I don't know if we have a motive that we could establish right now. I don't know if there would be a motive that would even be acceptable for something like this.
It was only after May 25th that people began to hear that question differently. Shortly after midnight on Monday, May 25th, 2026, Andrea Davis got in her grey SUV and drove to Tailgater's Sports Bar and Grill on the 6000 block of West Bell Road in Glendale, Arizona. She knew Nolan would be there, and she knew who he'd be with. Nolan was outside the bar with a 36-year-old woman. Police confirmed the two were familiar with each other. The exact nature of their relationship remains under investigation. Andrea approached, and then she opened fire. Nolan was not hit. The woman with him, as she ran toward her vehicle trying to escape, was shot in the back of the head. She survived, transported to hospital, injuries serious but not life-threatening. Andrea got back in the grey SUV and drove away. Glendale police responded, found Nolan uninjured and shaken. They had a shooter on the loose, a woman who had just committed attempted murder and vanished into the night. And then Nolan's phone buzzed. It was a text from Andrea. Then another. Then another. As Glendale officers watched Nolan's face change, they started reading over his shoulder. The messages were explicit. Andrea was not fleeing. Andrea was not hiding. Andrea was telling her husband exactly what she was about to do to their children. And then one more message came through. It was a photograph. Inside that photograph, one of her children, bleeding from the head. Officers immediately contacted Phoenix Police Department. What happened in the next hour and 21 minutes is the part of this story that everyone involved will never fully be at peace with. Phoenix police moved fast. They had the address, the Davis family residence, near 4800 West Paradise Lane, 2 miles from the bar. They had a known suspect. They had the threat messages. They had photographic evidence that a child had already been harmed. What they didn't have was time. At approximately 2:25 in the morning, officers arrived and forced entry. Inside the home, they found 3 people. Andrea Davis, aged 38, Austin Davis, aged 10, and Nolan Davis, 18 months old. All 3 had sustained fatal gunshot wounds to the head. Phoenix Fire Department pronounced all 3 deceased at the scene. A handgun was recovered inside the residence. Nolan Davis, the man standing in that parking lot reading those messages, was now a widower and a father with no children to go home to. Cases like this have a clinical name. Forensic psychologists call it familicide, the killing of one's own family, often followed by suicide. And in cases like Andrea's, researchers have identified a pattern that appears with devastating consistency in the days and weeks before the act. The perpetrator is rarely someone with a violent history. They are someone in acute psychological crisis who has become convinced in their completely distorted state that the world their children will face without them is worse than no world at all. It is not logic. It is not cruelty in the traditional sense. It is the final act of a mind that has lost its ability to see any other way out. Amy Bowers said Andrea was visibly unwell, actively asking for help, and yet no psychiatric hold, no crisis intervention, no welfare check. Not because no one cared, but because in our current system, visibly unwell and asking for help is not the same as being helped. That gap between someone crying out and someone catching them is where Austin and Nolan Davis fell. Nolan Davis's cousin Felicia Queen set up a memorial fund to help him cover the funeral expenses for his 2 children. Austin was 10 years old, a spunky, wild spirit who loved his dad deeply. Nolan was 18 months old. If you are close to someone right now, expressing this kind of desperation, fear of abandonment, fixation on the kids, a sense that everything is ending, please do not call it drama. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. The Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, dial 988. Both free, both confidential, both exist because cases like this are preventable. Austin Davis was 10 years old. He loved his dad. And Nolan Davis was 18 months old. He didn't have words yet for what was happening. Nolan Davis woke up on May 25, 2026 as a husband and a father. He ended that day as neither. The Memorial Fund link is in the description below. I'm still anonymous, and this has been Final Days Alive.